started. Welcome to the Contemporary Issues class. We are really pleased to have Rev Candi Boyd with us today. She said tomorrow is her 17th anniversary at Great Hospital as the chaplain there. So that's a good long run. And we look forward to her telling us today what that entails. What do hospital chaplains do today? And the challenges. So we're going to have a good conversation. We're not going to do any slides or anything, so we're just going to be informal and have a good hour conversation. But first, our usual announcements. Zoomers, please mute yourself in the lower left corner of your screen. Hi, Susan. Nice to see you from Toronto today. And we are recording this for future playback. And thought it was another nice sermon today. It was good to hear about walk in Spain. I'm going to put a sign up in my closet, my clothes closet, that says, "Don't worry about the clothes you wear.
I think you
Try and wear something nice." Try to have a little balance to that. But,
I think it's going to be all over.
yeah. So, any other announcements? We do have a couple of announcements. Go ahead.
I got two notes, one from Marilyn Garrett's husband, Joe, thanking us for the donation that we gave to the books. And then I got a letter from the book organization thanking us for that donation. And I believe we gave them $195. So it was a generous donation. They were really thankful. So, yeah.
There's one of our class members who passed away. And then we're going to make a donation to the lady missionary who just spoke to us a couple weeks ago. We should talk about that. Your hand up?
No,
Okay.
I'm just trying to mic you in so I can hear you.
Oh, okay. With your hearing aids. Good for you. Okay. Very good. Any other announcements? Things coming up? Well, Rev Candi, let me just do a little biography here. I know you went to Duke Divinity School.
I
You
did.
got your master's too. And is that where you met Lauren?
I did.
Rev Lauren.
Yeah.
You'll probably know Candi.
Funny story.
Candi is the spouse of our Rev Lauren Boyd here, and they have a son, Miller, who's 14. And you also went to Mississippi State
I did.
University. Is that where you grew up?
Go Dogs. I grew up in Mississippi and went to undergraduate at Mississippi State, and then took a year after and was the graduate intern at the Wesley Foundation. Is our United Methodist campus ministry on most college campuses. Took a year to do that and really discern where I knew God was calling me to seminary, but where would that be? So my parents and I took a little trip one week, and we went to, I'd been to Asbury, we went through Candler at Emory in Atlanta, we kind of made our way through the southeast and landed at Duke and went to chapel, and I just knew that's where I wanted to be. And my time at Candler, the little visit that I had there, they were reading the professors at Duke, and I thought, well, I'll just go there. So I put all my eggs in one basket and prayed and applied to Duke, and that's why I ended up. So I like to say that God called me to seminary, but basketball called me to Duke. Kind of where we land in our family.
Very important there. Yeah. And what did you do after that?
So, to give you just a little background of kind of how I landed, I'm going to try to use my preacher's voice. Okay, is this loud enough? Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Good. During seminary, I lost 3 immediate family members in a span of about 13 months. And when you're in the seminary with a lot of wannabe pastors, they want to care for you. Obviously, that's why we were there, right? We're being called to care for people and to show them love. But I had some folks that offered words that weren't real comforting to me, but it made them feel good. You know what I mean?
Right.
And because we tend to want to say something to someone who's hurting, but sometimes we don't need to. We just need to be present with people. And so it was during that time that I thought there's gotta be a better way to help people through crisis, to help people with heartache, to help people through trauma and loss, and to celebrate in the midst of all of that. And so I began to explore, what does it mean to be in a hospital setting, or in an extension ministry as a Methodist church, we call that. What does that look like? So I began to explore chaplaincy. And during my last year at Duke, I was an intern chaplain through Rev Hospital in Raleigh. And part of my service there was community-based. So during one day of the week, I was at a food shelter, like a food bank. And in the evenings, it was a free medical clinic. And so I kind of worked the room, worked the waiting room. And the unfortunate thing is that each week I saw the same people coming back because they were in such need. And I began to develop relationships with them. When I wasn't there in the mornings, I was working with an African-American woman, pastor, who had a nonprofit that served food to homebound folks within the community of downtown Raleigh. So I would show up in the mornings and I would load my car full of cardboard boxes of non-perishables, maybe some fresh food and eggs and bread. And I had a list of people, and I would drive around with low-income housing development in downtown Raleigh and deliver this food. And that was my first entry into chaplaincy, and which was really interesting because it was predominantly an African American community, and I was raised in the Deep South. And I was raised in a community that was loving to one another, but also had some tough racial divides within that city. And so it wasn't foreign to me that I was a white woman coming to offer food to this community. And so it was interesting throughout that year that people, if they could, would meet me on the sidewalk to be handed this food. We'd have conversation, and closer as the year went on, they were allowing me to make my way to their front porch. And at the end of my time, I was sitting at the kitchen table. And so this journey of understanding what it means to build the relationship with, to see someone different than I am and know that tension that lies, is a journey that we all have experienced in some way. And so after that, I really, graduation was coming up, and I agreed, of course, to go back to my home conference and to begin the ordination process there. But I had a tugging that I wanted to see what it would be like to then be a chaplain in a hospital. And there was this person, Lauren, that I was having a hard time separating myself from. And with integrity and in truth, in the way that United Methodist Church stood, I knew that I couldn't answer questions with the Board of Ordained Ministry with integrity and truth within that conference. So I left that conference on good standing, with the understanding I just want to explore more ministry options. And so I became a resident at UNC Hospital in Chapel Hill. And many teaching hospitals do have a residency program, much like medical residencies do. And I learned that the word residency means you live at the hospital. You become a resident of that hospital.
Yes.
And so I was trained, most of my work was done in 2 ICU units, a general medical floor, geriatric floor. I had 180 patients under my care. And then when you're on call, you're the only chaplain in the hospital for however long. For my case, it was from 4 in the afternoon when everybody else left until 8 o'clock the next morning. So and this hospital was a level 1 trauma hospital. And the closest for many communities and cities, even from Virginia, they would be flown into UNC. And so it took a while. My first on call, I'll tell you that I felt like a cat on the ceiling whenever the pagers would go off. I had 3 pagers, a personal pager to my units. I had the on-call pager and I had the trauma pager. Because anytime a trauma comes into the ER, we are expected to be present in the bay with the patient and the physicians and everybody offering care and kind of work as a liaison with the family. So in that training, I learned how to prioritize, how to triage, what's important, who needs to be seen first. If there were, unfortunately, sometimes 2 patients dying in opposite spots of the hospital, and then I get a call about a sweet person that would just like some prayer. I'm gonna pray with you later because there are some other things that need to be done. When I left residency and we moved to Denver, I had never heard of Craig Hospital. I had no idea. I just knew I needed a job. And we both worked retail for a while, and Lauren was able to find a part-time position leading worship at Hope United Methodist Church. And so we were keeping our foot in the door of our field, but working retail to pay rent and buy dog food and, do the thing, So I was working at St. Joe's for a while at night, 1 night a week. I had seen Craig, but didn't know if they had a chaplain or not from on the internet. And it was those days when that you walk your resume in and take it into HR. I found them on the map and I drove to Craig and I put my resume in there, and I thought, well, if they don't have a chaplain, maybe one day they'll want one, and or they'll see that they need one. But I also have some experience in HR and kind of working with folks, so anything, anything, let me do anything.
Did they have a chaplain at that time?
And I got a phone call about 4 or 5 months later from the director who hired me and said, we're looking for a chaplain. Ours is the retiree. And we've decided to not, we're just gonna work with the resumes we have on file. So that interview lasted 3 months and hired in June of 2005, and I've been there since. And I will tell you that I didn't know what I didn't know what I didn't know as still a real baby chaplain. So I've been in chaplaincy work for 20 years and at Craig for 17. What I'm grateful for, my emergency room opportunities and learning experiences while I was in training greatly prepared me for the work that I do now. Because I can see my patients that I have now who struggle with a traumatic brain injury or spinal cord injury. And I have seen those kind of patients critically in the ER. And so I know what their journey was like in that first few hours, even through their acute hospital stay. And now Craig serves as acute rehabilitation. We have patients from all over the country, from all over the world. We are growing like crazy. Our inpatient beds are stable, but our outpatient services is growing tremendously, and that's good. we're able to serve people that didn't even rehab initially with us that need additional help. And so when I think about, what I want you to know too is traumatic brain injury is not only due to injury, like a hit on the head, a concussion, but stroke. And so that's also a level of care that we offer for folks who are dealing with difficult reality of having a stroke. Most are fully aware, but they're phasic, they cannot express all that they want to. That's so incredibly difficult. And then we deal with folks with spinal cord injury that could be from a medical complication, surgery that didn't work out the way they'd hoped. Of course, accidents, car accidents, skiing accidents, diving. I have a baseball player right now. That's a little hard and touchy. So that's the population even from ages 16 into late 60s, 70s. That's the span of the folks that I work with. And when I was hired at Craig, we had 500 employees, and we now have a little over 1,100. So I'm also responsible for the care of the employees, and work with all of our physicians and round with them every day, and with nursing. And I get to go in occasionally and get to see night shift and offer them some love and some daytime faces that they just hear of. Because at night, if something goes wrong and I get a phone call, I want them to know who they're talking to, and I want to be able to put a face to the nurse on the other one.
How do you deal with the pressure and depression that goes along with other people's difficulties? What do you do with that pain? I mean, a lot of prayer, I'm sure, but
Doctor, you compartmentalize.
yeah, what do you do?
I do have to compartmentalize. I can't take all of this home, right? That's not fair to my family. There are a few cases that go with you. The ritual for me that I have found that works really well is at the end of the day when I walk to my car, my hospital badge, I take it off and I put it in the console and I close that, and I say, today I've done all I can do. The rest is with you, God. Today I've heard heartache and grief, and I give it away. I have to do that. It's like this physical. I'm no longer a chaplain when I walk into the door of the house, and I take the long way home because I'm a lot nicer because of traffic. I drive through Cherry Hills, and I meander my way to our side of town. But it's that physical ritual that really helps me to put away the day and to kind of focus on what I need to do the rest of the day when I get home. Yeah, that's a great question because there's a lot of grief.
Ever run into David Ortiz, our state house representative?
Absolutely.
She's talking about David Ortiz, a state house representative in Colorado, who's spoken to our class, and he's coming back again in July. And he was an Afghanistan veteran, crashed the helicopter and broke his spine. Paraplegic. Candy, tell us what you do when you first go in and meet a family or a patient. What do you say to them? I'm a chaplain, say Methodist, or and how are you received, and what do you do then?
So within the Craig, I serve all faith. I wouldn't even say it non-denominational because that has a tendency to attach itself to a Baptist lane of theme. So I'm a spiritual care provider. So what I say to people when I first meet them is that I don't care what you believe in or if you don't. I'm here to support you through this journey because I believe that we all have a spiritual self. We just have a different way of connecting to that power, and we have different names for it. And so whatever was important to you before injury, let's incorporate that into your time here. And Craig does a really good job of allowing space for me to do that, create the program that I have. And it's a great way to peel back the layers of the onion of one's soul. Because their length of stay with us is typically 6 to 10 weeks, somewhere in there. It's getting harder with insurance, but we push all the time because it's needed. A general rehab floor at University Hospital will give a new paraplegic 2 weeks. How do you do that? But that's based on insurance. And so we grab them as much as we can from all of the region and try to keep them as long as possible. But I say to them, this is going to be the hardest work you've ever done. And you are the same person inside, but you will leave a different person. And that their hope of walking out of Craig, we look at spinal cord injury, their hope of walking out of Craig helps them to get up every day and go to class. Their days are full. From 8 a.m. to 4:30, they are moving. It is kind of like boot camp, from class to class to class. It's more than just PT and OT one-on-one, but there's fit class, there's wheelchair class, there's how do I learn how to manage the way in which my body functions now, from bowel, bladder, skin, to keep me out of the hospital, to keep infection rate down. That's an entirely different way of understanding how God created us and the intricacies in which God took the time to put us together. And so when our brains get shuffled about and when our bodies break in certain ways, it takes a long time for things to come back together. And I try to stress with our patients who say, I'm walking out of Craig. So don't bother me with an order of a wheelchair because I won't need it. The pushback that comes to our rehab and our physical therapists when it's time to order those assistive devices to help them be most independent, that becomes a real tension spot because their faith tells them that they won't need it. What I try to do is to come on the back side of that and not challenge their belief. I am not there to evangelize. I'm not there to change how they believe, but maybe to refocus or redefine for them or help them to and understand that discharge date that you're looking at has nothing to do with your faith. God did not give us that date. We chose that as your rehab team and according to your insurance benefits. And this is not the end of the road of recovery and journey for you. But at that day of discharge, what I don't want is for what you truly believe will happen to possibly not. And then that becomes a big spiritual faith crisis.
Right.
And so trust us as your team, as your chaplain, to say this is not the first time for us, but this is the first time for you. And that recovery continues to happen after inpatient rehab. Mm-hmm. I truly believe that real rehab doesn't happen until after people leave Craig. Mm-hmm. That we provide them with the tools and the understanding of how their body works and resources to go back home and be within your community. I miss preaching chapel services right now. I love preaching. We just can't do that quite yet. But the wonderful thing was this thing Zoom. And churches were forced, as you know, to go online. And so the patients who I had who were committed in their community of faith in Oklahoma or Kansas or Texas or Washington State, they could take part in their community of faith every Sunday. And I encourage, do that. Don't turn on the chapel channel and listen to me preaching to an empty chapel. Listen to a voice that's familiar to you. A place in which they may even mention your name during service. And that connection back to their community is so important.
Well, Candy, of course, one of the questions we have is, do you get the patient that says, why did God allow this to happen to me? I'm a good person. Sure. It shouldn't have happened. And how do you respond to that?
Man, that's a hard one, right?
That's a hard question.
Yeah.
I've asked that question. You know, when you're looking death in the face of the loved one you love the most. When you experience being along a journey with someone who is struggling with critical illness, terminal illness. Why? Did Jesus say that at some point, somewhere? I mean, in the garden, did he not like cry out in that moment?
Why have you forsaken me?
Yeah. And that's what the people I work with, they feel that. They feel desperately alone. And some of them, I love them. Those who are of the Christian persuasion, they will want to, for whatever reason, want to read through Job during this time. Would you please not do that? That is the least helpful thing for you to do in this moment. Do not read through Job, but let me tell you how it is. Yeah. Because all the questions and crying out that Job does, you are doing it right now in your own way. And it ends by God saying, I am that I am that I am. And I have been all the time. And I haven't left you, not once. And so I try to help patients who ask this question and reframing. The God that we love, who created us to love one another, to care for one another, to be vessels of his love and his spirit in the world, can we truly believe, push back a little, can we truly believe that God intended for this to happen to you? And I'm just going to let the conversation go from there. And some people say, I do believe it. Okay, let's go from there. Let's talk about what that means for you. But in the midst of that, where can we find some hope? And so finding the purpose of why you're at Craig and why you're experiencing this life-altering injury, illness, not just you, but your entire family. Where do we see glimpses of God at work in it? For good, for positiveness. You're not going to find the answer to that here. It may be 2 years from now. It may be a year from now. It may be 5 years from now. You will come back to Craig and we will have lunch one day and you'll say, I just got it. I just figured it out. I needed to slow down. I needed a realignment in what's important in life. I've gone back to school. I'm now a counselor. I'm now working in social services. The list goes on and on and on. And I say what rehabilitation is just as much spiritual as it is physical and cognitively. Where are there opportunities for reconciliation with family, with friends, with people you haven't spoken to in 20 years that have found out about you being here, what has happened, and now they feel like one of the closest people you've been with in a long time. Where does resurrection happen within rehabilitation? And I try to help them see that for many of them, there may be something that wasn't possible yesterday that was, like feeding yourself. My first summer at Craig, I felt like a youth director. I had 5 kids from ages 15 to 17. I went scuba diving with them at A1 Scuba because in the water, it can move in ways that they can't when they're not, right? But they were able to do things within the water that felt like resurrection to them. We know the end of the story. We know what the true resurrection is. But what does it mean to live into that space as someone who is holding tight to their faith during a time of being at Craig? Helping them to see that, gosh, that 16-year-old that day, when he was able to just pick up a tissue like this, that's all he could do, and wipe his own nose, and I didn't have to do it. Celebration. How an engineer with GM designing bands that could be made accessible. When he was hurt, there wasn't such a thing for GM. He's still making music. And I'm so proud of his work and his life.
It's 11:05. I want to give a chance for folks to ask a question.
Yep.
Anybody here, and Susan on Zoom too, if you have a question, just go ahead. So much to mind here with the chaplaincy issue. And I also want to offer a chance for Dr. Bob in the blue shirt, who is a retired orthopedic surgeon, to ask a question if he has a specific one about Craig for chaplaincy.
Well, I think it's great work that you do. Is Dr. Glenn still working at Craig, or did you ever know him?
I don't. think so.
Okay, he may have been more than 17 years. What I sit here thinking about is, I was a children's doctor, and there are children's born with these problems, and their families obviously have a hard time accepting it. And I can hear some of your solutions, and it's lovely to hear.
Well, thank you for that. I would call them solutions.
Ways of dealing with the problem.
Ways of moving through. I don't think there's an ultimate solution. And I never expect my patients to just fully accept. I mean, could you? It's a journey.
Well, another one of my questions too, I'm sorry, I'm starting, but I'll get to you, Gail. Do you see a difference in attitude among different people of different faiths? Are Catholics different than Methodists, than atheists? And who has the better outcomes? Does their faith, does it make a difference in their outcomes, what their background in faith is?
Some of the most theological conversations I have are people who claim no faith.
Claim no, is that?
No.
Claim no faith at all, no faith
Yeah.
tradition.
Yeah.
Those are some of the most theological, and it would frighten them for me to say that to them. Sometimes I do think that people who connect with their spiritual self or their faith tradition are able to move through Craig with a bit more hope than others.
Okay.
I definitely think that that has an outcome on their stay, on their recovery, the way that they feel as though they can move back into the community because they are not alone. You know, that beautiful Psalm 23 is through the shadow of the valley of death. Through. I love that word through in that passage. There's not an end to it. You move through it. And there's, you know, the valleys, as we know, open up to these beautiful meadows sometimes. And Craig is that valley for so many people. And we just help, I just look forward to them being in the meadow and coming back and saying, "Ooh, man, that was a time."
Gail,
Does Craig have an internship or residency program for hospital chaplaincy or?
That is part of a project that I'm working on right now. Yeah, I do not have students at this moment. And being the solo chaplain and the way in which the hospital is growing, I hope to get a little help.
Get a little help, right?
Yeah, whether that's through students or hiring a trained.
And how many spinal cord injury rehab hospitals are there in the US? So I know Craig is sort of the western region, but
there are 10 model systems, and there are certain criteria that you need to meet to be a model rehabilitation center, and that's for spinal cord and brain injury, and we are a part of that 10 model system.
Okay.
There are a couple, Shirley Ryan in Chicago. There's one in Nevada. We're here. Shepherd Center in Atlanta is a great place. They actually exist because of Craig. The Shepherds, that family, their son was skiing in Colorado, and they had an accident, and they were very philanthropically involved in Atlanta and said, "Hey, we need a place like this in the Southeast." And so Shepherd now exists. So there's different, we're scattered. They're scattered. And so we all work together collaboratively in research. We each have a research center and great researchers that try to find ways to improve the quality of life for patients.
I can attest personally. So my companion, the last 2 weeks of his life was at Craig. And the work they did in those 2 weeks was just phenomenal.
Char,
Just from past experience in a more acute setting on neurosurgery, with these horrible tragic accidents, we just saw families crumble trying to deal with this. I wondered how involved you are with more extended.
Yeah, really involved. Yeah, I often will have pastoral sessions with patient and family. Sometimes just family while patients are in class. They're crumbling, and it's different conversation with brain injury and spinal cord. Those who are dealing with traumatic brain injury, some of them aren't aware yet as to where they are, and they will come out of that coma-like state while they're with us. And we don't know how people are going to do until we have them in front of us when our doctors agree for admission. So work with families is really hard, and there's grief, heavy grief involved. And I see that with spouses and with parents, particularly with brain injury, because the decisions of those critical moments in the first 24, 72 hours, decisions need to be made. How aggressive would you like for us to be when the outcome is really not known? And I've sat with parents grieving, realizing that the outcome will not be as they had hoped. And the difficult conversation of if I had just known, I could have said goodbye already instead of this constant day-to-day grief and loss in front of me.
The same thing with siblings in the family. Those are the kids that I just thought really got forgotten because the parents are so focused on this child in this horrible acute situation. And these kids come in and, they can't deal with the situation even looking at it, but then they're just like the forgotten kids.
Yeah. We have a really strong psychology department. And we have one psychologist in particular that typically works with outpatients who does a really good job with children. And so she helps those siblings. And then sometimes, pre-COVID at least, I would tell the parents, like, bring them in. We'd go to the gym and I'd play basketball with them. And in the midst of playing, we have a conversation about what's going on and how things are different. And just putting them to bed at night might be an aunt that they saw every so often, right? But how things will begin to come back together. They will be different and it's going to look different, but things will come back together.
Candy, have you ever seen what you thought was a supernatural miracle? Healing.
Well, I have one comes to mind, but I think all of them are. I think all of them are. I think it's supernatural for anybody who is struggling with a severe high cervical level injury to depend on a machine for every breath. That's supernatural to me. But I do have a former patient who she was things that some people do. She was on a trampoline gymnastic team. That's a thing, and broke her neck. And 15, 16, and this was years ago. And she was just a mess when she came in. Her film, when we looked at it, case plan, her neck, the spinal cord, it just, nothing fit together anymore. And I was preaching Easter service during her admission, and I remember everybody in front, and she was on my left with her family and one of her brothers. And after the service, she called me over, and at that time she had no movement from like a shoulder shrug down. That's about all she could do. But after that service, she showed me her thumb. Just started, she could make it move.
Wow.
And it just kept going. Things just kept moving. And she had an unexplainable recovery. From what we saw on the film, there was absolutely no way that she was going to be able to do what she was showing us. And I tell our patients every time, we can take scans and x-rays and labs all day long, but it doesn't show us what your body will show us. So it's kind of a way to treat what we see on the inside, but you are the best testament to how you're doing and how you need to be cared for and pushed and strengthened and what you can do. This last fall, I walked out of the front doors of Craig, and that patient from years ago was sitting on a bench because she couldn't come in the hospital. So her old therapists were coming out to see her. And she was doing a clinical rotation in Boulder, and she's a physical therapist, and she's married, and there is nothing wrong with her.
Wow.
She, all the things. She has no deficit, and that is the only time I've seen that happen.
Wow.
I mean, I've seen recovery of people who the acute care hospital said you'll never live off a ventilator. And we get them at Craig and our respiratory therapists and their processes, they're able to take that away and they can live without that machine offering them that breath. Those are some of the most courageous people I know.
How about your schedule? What do you work days or nights or both or
Yeah.
what's it like? Yours typical of hospital chaplains around the country.
I think rehab chaplains are different than the chaplains you'll find at University Hospital or at Swedish. I helped when they had a residency program at Swedish. I was adjunct faculty for them to kind of help teach that program. It's really different than acute care because you have such a finite amount of time to walk into a patient's room and say, I'm here to offer you spiritual care in your 24 hours that you're here. Or you're helping in that trauma bay in the midst of immediate crisis and car accident, whatever brought them to the ER. So it can be a faster pace for those chaplains than for me. I work a typical schedule. Some days are longer than others, which is hard when family and juggling and demands of being the spouse of a pastor of a church and then being at the hospital that may require longer days than I wanted. I do go in at night to see staff, and I'm sometimes called in at night for a sudden death. It's not typical, is that correct? They generally pass that critical stage, but it does happen. And so I'm there to make the phone call to the coroner. I'm there to call Donor Alliance, to call the family, to debrief with the staff, to talk with the code blue team, to kind of bring that emotion, not from a clinical standpoint, but from the emotion of the event. Let's pay attention to that. And because of the length of time that our patients are there, I'm able to really get to know them.
Within the medical community, does the medical community have an honesty of prognosis approach when they're talking to patients? In other words, I would hope you don't give people false hope. No, so next week you will be back out on the golf course. At the same time, how do they try to make it as honest as possible, saying it doesn't look good? The odds of recovering from this are no more than 10%. Or do they fluff it up and just try to kind of lift them into fantasy land and give them false hope? Any comments there?
It's 10 minutes.
History of the world is the next question.
It has been my experience that families and patients will hear in acute care one thing, which is you'll never walk again, or you'll never be able to feed yourself, or the list goes on. Come to Craig and our doctors are honest, but at the same time, they won't say the word never. They will talk about research, like research says, like within the first 2 years, you have your best chance of recovery and connections being made from the spinal cord. But what we're gonna do is prepare for today in hopes that you don't need it later.
But you still use that word.
Hope.
Hope.
Yeah.
Not false hope.
Yeah.
Hope.
Hope.
Okay.
There's a difference between false hope and hope. You can always end on a high note.
I think that our physicians do a really good job of balancing poor prognosis with know. I can't tell you, but right now, it's hard. And we see that it's hard. And we're helping you through this initial hard time. But our goal is to help people be as independent as possible by the time they leave Craig. And that's whether it's a cognitive injury or a spinal cord injury. What can we do to help you get back to where you were, knowing that it's going to be different? We always have that hope. We're never going to say never, unless it is. I mean, a few times have I heard our physicians say, "This won't be possible because of X, Y, and Z." Those family conferences are hard. We have an initial family conference with this patient family to talk about injury, and that may be the very first time they ever see a scan and hear about their injury. We have an interim conference to kind of where are things, how's it going, what's home look like, how are the home modifications going, what have you learned that you want to learn, our goals are this, and then a discharge conference to kind of bring it all together, and that's where the tears are shed.
Is there any kind of a volunteer program that Craig has that people can just go and be listening ear for patients when they're like in between all of their busy schedule, just so that they're not alone in their rooms thinking about things?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have a robust volunteer program, and there's different ways to connect with patients. There's not one. I hear you say something like a companion, because sometimes the patients have that break, they don't want to be with anybody. They're like, I'm done. I just need to be by myself. But there's different ways to be involved at Craig, and you still have a way to connect with the patients through our ladies in the sewing room that sew stuff in order for people to be independent, and zippers and Velcro, and just our rehab engineers are always looking for volunteers. So there's tremendous ways to be involved.
County dogs.
Oh, we have dogs. Every October around the St. Francis, Feast of St. Francis, I will offer a blessing, and it's sometimes we got 50 dogs. And we do it outside, and I do it quick because they're, you're borrowed time. During COVID, we didn't have the therapy, but we're bringing them back in, and it's so good to have them.
So they're in the hospital, dogs visiting patients.
Yeah, they're slowly integrating. We kind of did it slowly, had the dogs in one area, patients would come down, and now they're starting to make their way. And we have one physician who just can't help herself, and she'll bring her dogs, and one at a time, and so,
How about your dog?
I don't take my dog.
We've got 5 minutes left. Gail.
Okay, so briefly, can you address the ongoing support that Craig provides after discharge?
Yeah, so Craig works really hard at discharge to provide appropriate resources that may be needed in the community. And if they're in the Denver area and can access our outpatient services, and their benefit allows for it, then they're connected through the clinic, outpatient clinic, and they are assigned a case manager to help them continue to find resources as needed. So a social worker to help them on an outpatient basis.
So we're used to seeing females in the role of spiritual leadership, but there are a lot of faith communities that are not. Have you had experience where you wanted to provide guidance, help, comfort, and for want of a better word, the client was surprised that you were the person who showed up?
Yeah, I mean, I've had, people from traditions where I'm not seen as someone to offer spiritual or pastoral care in any way.
Right,
That's just their tradition.
right,
That's fine with me. I mean, I'm not here to change that.
right.
But but it's amazing how our conversations can throughout time and relationship, you know, that one Baptist fellow might end up in a Methodist church one day. Say my word is done.
I'm just thinking about the resistance, you know,
There is.
well, you're not who I expected and.
Absolutely. And I said, that's okay. Who
Sure,
in the community can I call on
okay,
to connect you?
okay.
It's like people that don't believe in blood transfusions.
Yes.
And when the rubber hits the road, all of a sudden, it's okay.
Or it's not. And then there's that, because staff struggle,
Right.
you know, but I hear that, yeah.
On a TV show,
I love it. Cover.
when that happens, and the hospital steps up and says, we're gonna get a court order to do that. Does that really happen? Will a hospital step in and say, we're gonna get a court order to treat this patient with blood when the family says no? Because it happens a lot when you're watching. You know, and I'm thinking, does that
That
really
is-
happen?
Well,
Do they
That's
really-
baloney.
Yeah,
I
as,
tell you what happens. I say, you know, your child may need a transfusion if their blood level drops. If I think they need it, I'm gonna give it to you and I'll deal with it. And I don't mess with any lawyers. It's a decision between the parents and me,
Okay.
and
Yeah,
I've
see,
never
that-
had any trouble.
Yeah, that makes more sense to me, but you know, when you see that, you think, do they really do that? Do they really take it that far?
well,
Yes,
as chair of the ethics committee, I think,
Yes.
Craig,
yes.
that becomes a whole different conversation
Mhm.
of value. Their value is not mine in
Yeah,
this moment.
right.
But it's important, and I can't overlay mine on top of theirs, but rather try to understand it so we can come to a place of consensus so that the care of the patient in the center gets the best care possible.
Yeah.
And I tell the parents, I don't believe in letting a child die. Okay, so that's my belief. Okay, I'm sorry about yours if it doesn't.
You have an ethical value as a physician.
I try and explain that up front.
Right.
I'm not
Right.
debating what they believe, but I have to live with my own beliefs.
Sure.
Who we are informs everything we do.
We are out of time, but thank you so much, Candace. Do a quick prayer, just say thank you, Lord, for Candy's service. Please be with her in the coming years. And we thank you for all your blessings. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, guys.
Take
Thank you.
care. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good to see you.